identification, evidence collection, and interpretation of the evidence in crime scenes. So to get there, I need to go through your educational background and your work history.
Yes.
So if we could start, my understanding is that you began relevant schooling or schooling relevant to crime scene investigation, evidence collection, and interpretation of evidence in crime scenes somewhere in the neighborhood of 1983. Have I read your...
Yeah. In 1983, I started education for laboratory school, we call it in Holland. And I did analytical chemistry, and it qualifies you to do all kinds of analytical chemistry work on the laboratory.
After technical school for laboratory education, were you in the military?
Yes.
And what country's military?
Yes, we got drafted in the Netherlands at that time for the Netherlands, and then of course for NATO.
And were you in a Green Beret? Were you in Special Forces?
Yeah, we were long distance reconnaissance behind enemy lines, Green Berets.
After Special Forces military service, did you go to university?
Yes, I started working, and during the evening hours I started in Rotterdam University degree in biochemistry.
After your work in biochemistry, would that be equivalent to what we call a bachelor's degree or Bachelor of Science in the States?
Yeah, of course, difficult to translate, but something between bachelor and master's degree.
How long did you go to school for?
That took in total 7 years, I think.
And was it, how long would that program take to complete if you weren't also working?
You can do it if you do it on day schooling, like in 4 years.
And then did you have any follow-up after university?
Well, I started working for the Netherlands Forensic Institute. That's the institute which investigates all the homicide cases and all kinds of criminal cases in the Netherlands. And of course, we got a lot of indoor training. There's not a lot of training outside there, especially in that time, in forensics. And then, all kinds of extra training for blood and pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction, DNA.
Was that in approximately 1989?
What you're talking about now?
Well, the work you started after university. Where did you? Was it something Centicor?
Oh, yeah, but that's just in '92, I think, or something.
Will you go through? And I can provide you your CV to refresh your recollection. I know that there's a lot on there.
Yeah.
But starting with relevant experience after school and moving forward to your starting the business in independent forensic services.
Yeah, that's a lot. I started working on the Netherlands Forensic Institute, and that was on the Department of Serology, and that's before the big boom of DNA. So the serology department changed later in the biology department, and that's where we do investigation of DNA. And I work on sub-department of that biology department, and I was in trace recovery, so I found all kinds of evidence on pieces of clothing and items, and that was put forward for DNA. And of course, by doing so, I had to do a lot of blood-stained clothing. We had a lot of homicides. We used knives in Holland a lot, baseball bats. So I got interested in blood and pattern analysis and blood stain identification. At one point after '94, we were very secure about the source of DNA, about the source of the blood. But then you want to know, okay, how did it get there? What does it mean that you find this? And so I think that's in 1998. Then we started doing the first courses, introductory courses in blood and pattern analysis, and those were given by United Kingdom experts from their national lab, Forensic Science Service. And at that time, our lab decided that we wanted to do more with it so that we could do more interpretation also for the courts. And in that time, I got the appointment that I had to look all over the world for experts and expertise about blood stain pattern analysis and make it something which we could introduce in the Dutch courts in the Netherlands. And in doing so, I did basic courses in the United States, in Canada, and then later on, we found what we thought was the best match, an understudy program in Ontario, and that's a program where you get trained with a mentor. So during training phase, you get an blood stain pattern analyst expert assigned to you, and well, he will first you work with him. So you go to crime scenes with your expert, with your mentor. Then you work together on crime scenes, and you both work on it. And then later on in the third stage, you do the crime scenes, and your mentor is there to watch you perform your analysis and the reports. And after that, it's finished with a mock court and then a trial, and you get a certificate.
What year approximately was that process when you were working with a mentor?
I think it was 2002.
Mr. Eikelenboom, let me interrupt you because I couldn't understand part of what you said. So the whole part with the mentor, was that blood splatter analysis? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's blood stain pattern analysis.
Okay, thank you.
This will be requiring you to back up a little bit, but did you ever receive a university certification for trace evidence recovery?
Yeah, as part of the training and also blood stain pattern analysis, I did all kinds of training, but I don't have the dates, so I need my CV for that. I really don't know when I exactly did all those things. But yeah, that was in Canada as well, I think, Ottawa.
Yes, you may.
Mr. Eikelenboom, what was the university where you received the trace evidence recovery certification?
That's the Summer Institute of Forensic Sciences in Ottawa.
Was there also one from Carleton University?
Yeah. I don't know where I have that one. Yeah.
So have you kept up with developments in trace evidence recovery?
Yes.
Will you tell the jury what forensic blood stain pattern analysis is?
Yeah. So blood stain pattern analysis is the investigation of the size, shape, location, distribution of blood stains at scenes of crime or at clothing. And you want to know what caused them, so what gave rise to their origin, were these caused, and that of course can give you a lot of information about handlings and violence or things happened on the crime scene. For instance, at what altitude a blow was struck, or was the victim lying on the ground when he was struck, or was he standing up. Transfer patterns, for instance, can give you information about a murder weapon. If you have a transfer which looks like a shoe, then somebody maybe walked with a shoe or a hand or a knife. That can be very useful. So the blood stain pattern analysis can help you deduce a lot of information about crime.
Is it a fair understanding that in the Netherlands, gunshot or firearm crime is less common, and you dealt more with blunt force trauma type injuries and knife wounds, that kind of stuff?
Yes, in the Netherlands, guns are outlawed, so it's very difficult to get a gun license in the Netherlands. So we get much more homicides with knives and blunt force objects, and therefore at the National Lab, that's the majority of cases. And then, yeah, the shooting cases, which we of course also have, is more mafia-related or gang-related.
In the Netherlands, does the justice system have a different look to it? It's not adversarial, as I understand it. It's more of a team? Well, I'll have you explain it.
Yes. Yeah, we have an inquisitorial system. That means that we don't have a jury. In our system, and a lot of other European countries, we have 3 professional judges who decide on criminal cases. It's a major case. So that means rape, homicide, basically. And in the Netherlands, you actually always work for the court. So you cannot, well, it's almost impossible to work just for the defense. They don't have any money or income. So we have an investigative judge. As soon as there's a suspect, the investigative judge gives the orders to the experts to do the investigation, and you report to the courts. So, yeah, that's quite a difference from the situation in the United States.
Have you received certification in bloodstain pattern analysis, and was that something you used in your role working for the court?
Yes. In order to get it introduced, I had to do all the training, and I also have to explain the courts. So I did do a lot of training to judges and prosecution and district attorneys. And after I finished the mentorship and all the training in the United States and in Canada, I started writing reports for the courts.
Was some of that through an organization called the Netherlands Forensic Institute?
Yeah, at that time I still was working for the Netherlands Forensic Institute.
And it's through that agency that you did work that was presented to courts?
Yes.
Did you, I believe this is 2002, so if that helps you orient, if you need to refresh your recollection, but did you do an understudy program with the Ontario Provincial Police?
Yes, I did.
And what was that related to?
Yeah, I just explained the understudy program was the program which I talked about with the mentor. So you get assigned an expert who's a qualified bloodstain pattern analyst, and you walk along with him first, and you go to court, and then you go over all his cases. Then you work together, and later on you work alone, and he will review all your cases.
Did you study the math and physics as it pertains to bloodstain pattern analysis with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police?
Yeah, that was part of the understudy. You needed to do that. That math and physics is a very important part of bloodstain pattern analysis, and it's the more scientific part of it. You want to know how, especially projected bloodstains are created, and you can do all kinds of calculations on the angle impact, for instance. And that's the way we can determine how an area of origin or an area of convergence could have been caused.
Do you recall the work or the study that you did at the Institute for Criminalistics and Criminal Investigation Sciences in the Netherlands, Zutphen?
Oh, Zutphen, yeah. Yes, that's actually the Dutch Police Academy. And our CSI officers are trained there, and I gave a lot of training there as well.
You both received and provided training at that institute?
Yes, we had at one point, but I was already qualified, and so it was more to keep track on them. We had, I think it was Herbert McDonnell come over there, did the training in bloodstain pattern analysis for crime scene officers, and I had joined that as well.
Have you received advanced bloodstain pattern analysis from the Miami-Dade Police Department Training Bureau?
Yes, I did.
Is that similar to a police academy type of thing?
Yeah, I think it was really connected to their state lab. So yeah, I would say that's similar. That I think a lot of police officers use that as their training.
How about bloodstain pattern recognition study through the Canadian Police? Yeah,
so yeah, those are trainings, part of the training of the understudy program, or you can do it separately, but they also use it for their own police officers to, if you have the basic course, then it's just, I said, then you're not an expert to qualify for testing in court, but it's very useful for police officers to know something about bloodstain pattern analysis and stain selection, for instance, for DNA sampling.
with the the Netherlands Forensic Institute, did you gain practical experience or real-world experience doing crime scene investigations?
Yes. When I was working on the Netherlands Forensic Institute, I started out at the serology and then later on trace recovery unit. I was the head of the trace recovery. But we also soon found out that, especially with the coming up of DNA testing, that there was a lack of expertise for taking those samples. So I started a project where we brought a multidisciplinary team of experts from the national lab to the crime scene. And those were more complex crime scenes, of course. And that could be blood stains, could be luminol investigations, but also hairs, fibers, fingerprints, puncture residue, depending on the type of case. And when the police call us with these complex cases, then we would go with a multidisciplinary team to the crime scenes.
So you have obviously done crime scenes. Can you estimate how many tons?
Hundreds.
Have you participated in evidence collection and the interpretation of evidence at those crime scenes? I think that was borne out by your last answer, but.
Yes. So that had to go to court, of course, at one point. So we had to testify about that every now and then. I have to address that in the Dutch system, you don't go to court that easy. It's only for high-profile cases, and we call an average homicide. There's a lot of DNA scientists now in the Netherlands who never been to court because it's just not important enough. The judges are used to work from reports and not having the experts in the courts.
But you're one of the experts who has participated at court?
Yes, a lot.
Have you gained knowledge in the use of something called luminol?
Yes, actually that was the thesis of my end project for the University of Rotterdam. And I investigated luminol and the damage it could do on DNA, because that was one of the worries. Luminol, you probably heard of it already, is very useful in detecting blood. The problem is that you get a lot of false positives. And the other problem at the time was that you wouldn't know how much damage it would do on the DNA. And of course, it would be easy, as you see on television, to use this all the time. But there are some downsides of luminol, especially if you see that you spray your fluid on all your evidence. That's not something you should think lightly of. You should do, and that's the one of the conclusions of my thesis as well, is that it's a last resort. It's not a thing that, okay, I don't want to do this investigation or it takes too much time to start luminol and see if we find something. You always do a thorough investigation and then the luminol. So for my thesis, I investigated luminol. I changed the solution. So I made a new solution where we think DNA damage was limited. And then later on, we also made a solution which was usable after everything was done, and you could make it more visible with a stronger solution, which would do more damage to your crime scene. But it would be more easy to photograph that luminescence, or the light which is caused by the luminol.
This happens every time I bring up luminol with you. You know a lot about it. Did you participate in something called the Luminol Project?
Yes. I started the Luminol project in the Netherlands, and that's why I had to investigate it. And I asked, and I did get to do this at the University of Rotterdam to make it my end thesis.
Okay. When you say that it was the dissertation or thesis?
Yeah. I don't know how you translate it.
In the States, that's something that people who are getting master's degrees do.
Yeah.
Is your education to the level of master's degrees? Is that the equivalent?
Yeah, some translators would translate it.
Hold on a second. Sorry.
He already answered this. He said his education's in between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So this is asked and answered.
Yeah.
I'll move on.
Okay.
In the Netherlands, did you gain real-world experience doing typing of blood group and protein markers?
Yes. This is the blood group typing. You all know ABO system, where you have either you're O positive or A or B. So at the time when I started the national lab, we didn't do the DNA testing yet. We were investigating that as something for the future. So that started in 1994. but I was at the lab before that, so I started this protein markers and DABO typing system to identify, well, larger blood stains. You need quite a lot of blood to do this type of typing, because then you take a piece of stain and you dissolve this, and then you can try to find out the blood group.
And were you involved in the coordination of complex and high-profile cases, as in when a crime scene investigation was being conducted? Were
Yes.
you responsible for dividing tasks? And
Yes, as I said, I was the project leader for several projects. Luminol was one of them, actually sub-project of the crime scene investigation. But the project was wider. It actually started out more with complex homicides on prostitutes. I wrote a project for that because we didn't solve those cases. And these women were found naked outside. And then I said, well, okay, we have to find DNA evidence on these bodies. And of course, if they're lying in the water, that was very difficult. So we started a project with going to crime scenes and take samples on the crime scene or even in the water if that was necessary. So from that on, the project was born to make it a multidisciplinary team where we could go to crime scenes and do investigations on the crime scene itself, all biological investigations, but also hairs, fibers, anything we need. We would also do fingerprints on the bodies, for instance, at the time.
so it sounds like trace recovery on bodies was something you did.
Yes.
And did you have any part in a cold case project?
Yes, of course. We were quite successful. We solved a couple of cases which were deemed unsolvable, where the body which was lying in the water for like 3 weeks. Normally they would say, well, we don't even touch it, we don't investigate it. We did, and actually it was one of the first hits in the database. And from that on, they also started thinking, yeah, of course, this new DNA technique is very useful in cases which were not solved. So I was the project leader in cold cases for the national lab. So I was not the project leader from the police. The police started these projects and had their police leaders leading these projects, but they came to me, and from the national lab, I was the leader of these cold cases. So I would decide which we would need in the teams, like hairs, fibers, fingerprints, and then I was the contact person for these cold cases.
I know that. Well, do you have a business called Independent Forensic Services?
Yes, in 2005 I joined the business started by my wife.
I know that your business does a lot of different sorts of crime scene and forensic work. I kind of, for the sake of time, want to sort of narrow it to what I think is going to be relevant to your testimony today. So with the court's permission, may I ask a leading question?
Go ahead.
Does Independent Forensic Services, your lab, do bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene investigations, crime scene reconstruction?
Yes.
Also, there's a lot of DNA work done by this laboratory, but I'm not going to inquire after that with you, but that's accurate.
Yes.
So with a more open-ended question, you go through lots of DNA stuff as well.
Yes.
And I've got a lot on your continuing education for the sake of keeping everyone's attention. I won't go through all of this at this point. But another thing, in your experience, in your training, have you become or developed any expertise in photography?
Yes, of course, during bloodstain pattern analysis and on the police academy, photography of crime scenes is very important. So yeah, you get specialized training about that.
So you have familiarity with crime scene picture taking?
Yes.
And have you done it at crime scenes?
Yes.
So you've been trained in it, you've got continuing education in it, and you've done it?
Yes.
Are you familiar with something called touch DNA?
Yes.
What is it?
Protection and relevance, Judge. This isn't anything that's in his report, and I think at this point, if Mr. Moran is asking to endorse him for the original purposes that he stated, I wouldn't have an objection. but I do want to make sure that we're setting the proper parameters on that. So I'm not aware of any DNA testimony from this witness.
We weren't, you mentioned that it wouldn't be any DNA.
Your Honor, I'm not, it's just that touch DNA is a trace forensic technique, but I'm not meaning to elicit testimony on it. I just was using that to demonstrate the
Then we don't need to do it. And there is a stipulation as to expertise. Are you willing to accept that, or you want to go any further?
No, that's great. That's
okay. I will, and you're also seeking to endorse him in blood stain or blood splatter analysis too, as a subsection of?
Yes, Your Honor. So what we would seek to have him qualified in is crime scene investigation, evidence collection, interpretation of evidence in crime scenes, especially blood stain pattern analysis.
And you're okay with all that, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, the only one that I want to be clear on is crime scene investigation in general. Could I just inquire a couple questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So would you agree with me that bone and medical are not in your field of expertise?
Bone and medical. So as I said, I set up the multidisciplinary team for the national lab, and that doesn't mean that I'm an expert in all these fields. It's impossible. That's why we brought this multidisciplinary team. So I know about it, of course. I work together. I actually asked my wife to join the national lab for that. But I'm not qualified as an expert on bone.
Okay. I didn't mean for it to be a complicated question.
Okay.
On June 3rd of 2021, you interviewed with myself and Investigator Heidel, right? In that interview, you advised that bone and medical were not in your field of expertise.
So, no, I'm not the expertise.
Okay, thank you. Would you also agree that canines aren't in your expertise?
I've worked with them. Actually, train school was very close where we lived in the Netherlands. But I'm not the expert on dogs, no.
Thank you. And then similarly with DNA, you didn't render any opinions about DNA in this case, correct?
I didn't render the opinions, yes.
Okay. So, and I'm asking you questions just to see what your endorsement's going to be, but my understanding from your report is that you reviewed some evidence in the case, you reviewed some photographs in the case, and you're going to talk about just interpretation of that. Am I right about that?
Yes, but of course, with the blood stain pattern analysis, DNA is important. You have to know the source. So in that sense, yeah.
You know, I'm not.
It's kind of.
I'm agreeing with you here. I think you're getting kind of more into cross-examination.
It's okay, Judge. I just want to be clear that he won't be endorsed as an expert in any of these other areas.
Well,
based
not
on,
yet.
Okay.
So
if we're clear on that, I have no objection to the endorsement as it was stated, if that's what crime scene investigator means.
all right.
Thank you.
And he'll be accepted as an expert in crime scene investigation, evidence collection, including trace evidence collection, interpretation of the crime scenes, which includes blood splatter analysis. So go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Eikelenboom, did you review photos the FBI took in this case?
Yes, I reviewed all the photos, which were a lot, which I received in the case.
And obviously you were not there and not invited when the FBI was taking photographs.
No, I was not in the crime scene.
And also, sorry, this is sort of obtuse, but you weren't aware that of Dylan Redwine or Mark Redwine at the time FBI was doing its work?
Aware of the case?
Well, in November of 2012, you would not have been aware or invited?
No, I didn't hear about the case. No, I didn't know.
So this is it's sort of unpleasant to ask, but it comes up with questioning of our witnesses. Was all of your training and schooling free?
No.
Does it cost you time and money to travel to Durango?
Yes.
And do you know the industry standard hourly rate for professionals with your expertise?
Yes, it's different. We are connected to some of these agencies and stuff, and then the difference, but $300 to $400 is quite normal.
Did you agree generously to work at a discounted rate in this case?
Yeah, in the state of Colorado, we work for ADC and the public defenders for just state rates.
And do you take every case that comes in the door, or are you choosy about the ones you pick?
No, we make selections.
Is it customary or proper to rely on photographs in your field?
Yes, very often. the crime scene is not preserved. And of course, with for good instances, the cold case teams, you don't have that anymore. So the thing you hope for is that proper photographs were taken of the crime scene in order to do analysis from photographs after that. Of course, if it's possible, then it's better, and it would be giving you a lot of insight to go to the crime scene, but very often that's not possible.
So it's important when taking crime scene photographs to make images that can be later relied upon.
Yes, that's an important part of the investigation.
In your training and experience, is it acceptable or reasonable for investigating agencies to take photographs and then later say, it's unreasonable to rely on our photos? Is that an acceptable practice?
Objection, Judge. This is argumentative.
I don't understand that question, Mr. Moran.
Let me ask it this way. Sir, when you're taking photographs, you understand other people may need to look at those and rely on them, yes?
Yes, with blood stain pattern analysis, it's very important. If you do the investigation, you know you have to give evidence about it, then you have to relay this to the court or to the jury. And of course, they should be able to make their own opinion about the evidence you collected and the evidence which was on the crime scene or on the clothing of victims. So yes, it's important to have those, have good pictures of those so that you can rely on those in court.
When you take crime scene photographs, do you take them in a way that only you can be the interpreter of those photographs, or are they made so that other reasonable viewers could make some use of them?
Yeah, no. I think with all forensic sciences, it's important that another expert can come make his own opinions and conclusions about work you did, and that they can verify at least what the work you did on the evidence or on the scene of crime. So in that sense, you have to take pictures that other experts can rely on, and also the court and the juries.
So some part of it is to make sure that verification is possible later.
Yes, it's verification, but also for your own recollection. Look at this case. You've seen hundreds, I think even thousands of pictures, some of them maybe double, but thousands of pictures. It's impossible to remember all of it. There's so much in there with the bones, with clothing, with the crime scenes, the car, the house. It's impossible even for a crime scene officer who was on the crime scene to remember all of that. You cannot, especially if you keep in mind that it's not the only case people work on, so then you have to be going back to recollect things. You have to go back to your own pictures and your own reports.
Your Honor, may I also approach with these photographs?
Yes.
And I neglected to inquire, at least with respect to 1240 through 1245, is there any objection?
So my understanding of these photographs is that 1240 through 1244 are already admitted exhibits, but I just want to confirm that with counsel.
That's correct.
So these are the
Through you?
yes, the people's exhibits. They're just compilations. I just want to make sure they're the same photographs.
They are comparisons side by side, so
And
I
then,
think so, and I suspect that they're ones that prosecution would have meant to introduce.
yes, no, just making sure they're the same. I have no objection to those. And then 1245, I think there just needs to be a little foundation on 1245, but I'm not going to object to it ultimately.
All right. So you want to lay the foundation on 1245?
I beg your pardon, Your Honor.
He's not objecting to anything but 1245, and on that he just wants some, a little foundation.
Understood. Starting here with 1240.
All right, well, hold on. I thought you were going to admit everything at once, so
Beg your
1240
pardon. I can do that. Beg your pardon.
that's fine.
Move to admit everything 1240 through 1244, excluding 1245. I'll lay some foundation for that when we get to it.
All right, 1240 through 44 are admitted.
Permission to publish.
Yes.
Mr. Eikelenboom, are these photographs that you have seen before?
Yes.
Is your understanding that these are photographs of the front of the love seat at Mr. Redwine's house?
Yes.
And in looking at these photographs, one, can you describe for the jury sort of what's going on between the left photograph and the right photograph? Do you observe sort of any photo enhancements that's happened here?
Yeah, there are, of course, different techniques. I'm not sure if the jury is aware of the luminol treatment and the way that works. Or?
You're right. We need to start there. Thank you.
Okay.
What's the blue stuff, and why would you manipulate a photograph when you've sprayed luminol?
Yes. So luminol is used when you normally use if you don't see blood stains on a crime scene and you want to know if, after you did a thorough investigation, if there could be blood on the scene. In order to do so, you darken the room, and then you start applying an activated luminol solution. But of course, taking pictures in the dark is very difficult because if you have a normal camera, you just see black. So you have to adjust your camera settings depending all kinds of ways of do the photographing. So I'm not exactly sure. You have to ask the police officer who took the pictures, but it's very common to take a picture before the investigation, with the light on, then you take the light off, and then you have to take a picture during the application of luminol. Otherwise, you won't see this blue light, which is emitted in the dark. It's not that strong. So if we would apply luminol here, you probably wouldn't see it. It's very, very faint. So what we do then is we take a picture in the dark. If the luminol glows, it glows with blood, but also with all kinds of other objects or metal objects or paints. So you have to wear for false positives, and then you take a picture of those. And one of the things I think what I did here is that they overlay the luminescence, so the blue light, on top of the picture of the couch. And that's a very common practice. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Do you want me to elaborate on that?
Let me ask another question. So in looking at this image, are you able, with your blood stain pattern analysis expertise, able to say whether what we're seeing here is a swipe pattern? Mr. Eikelenboom, I get ahead of myself. I need to ask you what a swipe pattern is first, and then we can go there.
So, the swipe pattern is part of the transfer pattern, but the object comes in contact with another object. Swipe means that there's a movement, so the object comes in contact with another object while it's moving. With luminol, we have to be very careful, and that's also, I think that's generally accepted with interpretation. Photographs are taken in the dark. Normally, you don't see them with the naked eye by daylight, so you do an interpretation on something which is not visible with the naked eye. So that means that you have to take back a couple of steps already and say, okay, we have to be careful and we have to go up maybe a notch with the interpretation of this. So basically our conclusion in the Netherlands was, in my literature, is that with blood stain pattern analysis and luminol, which is closely related, a lot of luminol experts use, or a lot of blood stain pattern analysts use luminol. But with interpretation, you have to take great care and basically you keep it with either the object was cleaned or not cleaned. That's something you can say something about it, because that's where it's used for. But the luminol is a fluid, so you add a fluid on top of a blood stain, and it will alter the appearance already with that. So yeah, great caution has to be taken if you want to do an interpretation with that.
So you've got to be cautious about how you interpret luminol. It's different than interpreting blood.
Yeah, with blood stain pattern analysis, normally, I don't know, you have all these basic patterns, impact, cast-off, transfers, and there's all kinds of definitions for those, and pictures with that, and then you can do this interpretation. But yeah, with luminol, that's much more difficult.
Are you comfortable saying whether this is a swipe or a drag pattern?
No.
If this was not luminol and it was in fact blood, you could make a determination like that.
Yeah, it would be easier if you have a real blood stain. Then of course it would be much easier to do the interpretation. But then you see the nice red color.
Is this what we're seeing here consistent with transfer?
Well, yeah, of course. In the broader sense, everything is transferred. Some object transfer blood onto this couch, or one way it was transferred. But with the blood stain pattern analysis, you want to shed light on the mechanism which caused it, and that's the thing I don't know in this case.
One of the reasons it's important to be careful in interpreting what happens based on what you see with luminol is because luminol is so sensitive, right?
Yes. Depending on the type of solutions, there's all kinds of, there's basically worldwide, I think, like 3 or 4 solutions which are used. One of them is mine. And those have all kinds of, well, not all kinds, they have a different type of reaction and sensitivity. So it's described in literature that basically with luminol you would be able to detect dilutions of blood in the area of 1 in 100,000 as most sensitive. That's extremely sensitive.
CBI analyst Joe Clayton said that there were formulas up to 1 in a million.
Yes, I heard that. We did a lot of experiments, and I think we touched the 1 in 100,000 ones. Kind of different, it's difficult, and you have to keep in mind that this is laboratory testing. So what we're doing, we do these test tubes and we make a dilution, so 1 milliliter of blood in 9 milliliters of water, and then you dilute further from that, and then you get into millions of dilutions. But keep in mind that this is not in any way shape similar to what we see at crime scenes. Of course, nobody's using 100,000 liters of water or 20,000 gallons of water on a crime scene. That would be a swimming pool or something like that. So at the crime scene, it's more the using water and soapy solutions and all kinds of other cleaning materials and then rubbing it. But you would never get to that kind of dilution, of course.
But with a 1 to 100,000 dilution rate, you could still find blood if you had used 20,000 gallons of water in the cleanup process. You'd still get a blue illumination. Yes,
and that's also, so I said that this is in laboratory testing. And crime scenes, for instance, you have to look at the object. This very smooth, stable, well, there's some nerves in there, but if it was completely smooth, then you would be able to clean that completely away. But for instance, the carpet, I never seen somebody clean a carpet completely that luminol would not detect it anymore. So depending on the surface, you can even put 100,000 or 200,000 liters of water on the carpet. It will not clean it away that the luminol won't detect it. So yeah, the surface is very important.
What happens when a small amount of blood is cleaned up with bleach?
As said before, what happens with luminol is that it has a lot of false positive reactions, and actually it's false positive. Luminol just reacts with, oxidized metals. And in blood we have the heme groups, difficult thing, but everybody knows that we transport oxygen through the blood, and the molecule doing that is a heme group, and that contains iron. And that it's that iron the luminol reacts with, and that's important because that gives the fluorescence. And it is kind of different from other types of fluorescence, like the door paint, which we see a lot, or cars, because there's a lot of metal in cars, and the paint, of course, is very often reacting. Rust, of course, is reacting. So if we search for blood with luminol, all these things which are not blood are called false positives. And I think every crime scene you go to, you will find false positives. That's why, and also the police and the FBI here introduce an extra test, the phenolphthalein test, or you can do other tests, I think they called UT card. You can do extra tests which are more sensitive, or not more sensitive, but more reliable in estimating of something is blood or not. So if you have the phenolphthalein test, that's a presumptive test for blood. So after luminol application, you see a suspicious stain. You take a sample from that, and then you can test that for the presence of blood with a more reliable test for blood, like phenolphthalein.
They glow differently. Is that a fair understanding? Bleach will glow really bright.
Yeah, bleach is one of. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't answer that question. Yes, bleach is a problem. If people clean with bleach, bleach will react with the luminol. So that's a false positive reaction. But of course, also on crime scenes, bleach is more and more used because of the CSI effect by criminals. So that will make the interpretation even more difficult. If the stain was cleaned with bleach, you will get a nice luminescence, nice color of light. But it is false positive. But still, it's also possible that there's blood under that and that you will still detect it and test positive. So yeah, you have to be careful there as well.
When you're discussing this 1 to 100,000 solution before luminol will not pick up blood, is that a fair way to understand it when you're saying it's 1 to 100,000? So you would have to use the 100,000 liters plus to make the blood stain go away or make it undetectable by luminol? I've said a different way. I can tell by your face. Okay.
Sorry.
Do small quantities of washed away blood cause strong luminescence?
Yes, a little bit depending on the solution. The way we made our solution was that we were not interested in concentrated blood because our assumption was that police officers and experts would find that with the naked eye and don't apply luminol on that. If you have a concentrated stain, that sounds maybe weird, but very often that does not luminesce very well. And you say, well, there's a lot of blood in there, but that's like you get a quenching effect. It means that you inhibit the luminescence of the luminol. So if you have a big pool of blood and you put the luminol on top of that, you see some luminescence on the outside, but very often not on the inside. And that's because there's so much blood that it doesn't work very well. Well, if there's a pool of blood that size, you don't want to use luminol. That's stupid. So we made our solution just for more diluted and visible stains, which it work perfectly with. So diluted blood or luminol should be used for diluted blood.
That's what 1240 back up, publish it. So this image that's coming up, the one on the couch that we were just looking at, fair understanding of this is everything that's blue blood or something else? Was there that much blood or
yeah, so yeah, you always have to be careful. Luminol is a solution. It's a watery solution. So if you apply it, especially if you use these spray bottles, what we started out with that when we just started the project. What happens is it starts running, and if you look at this picture, can I stand up?
You can talk into that microphone, and you can pull it out if you need to.
So you can see there, as a water solution, you have to be very careful because it's dripping, running, and that's actually what you can see here. So here you see the blue fluorescence or luminescence, we call it. But here you can see the patterns. They're also blue. The luminol on itself is reacting also already. If you have a bottle of luminol in the dark, you can see it glow. The luminol on itself is already glowing, but blood will give it an extra, or the false positive material will give it an extra luminescence, and blue causes that you can see it like this. So here, see strong luminescence, and then you can here also see that there's droplets, and that is what we saw very often as well. That when you spray, especially with a hand bottle, that you get a mist of droplets, but the size of these droplets are different. That's why we recommended to use professional spray paint crystal, so that you get a very even mist of luminol, and that you don't get the running, especially on vertical objects, vertical surfaces like here, that it starts running down. And then the other thing, of course, is in order to see this, sometimes you have to spray a little bit more, which is, of course, not so good for the sample. And if you spray more, then also what happens is that your solution starts running and your dripping starts running. And what happens then is that you can see that this also is still luminescing. So that's also the reason that you have to be very careful with interpretation to make the stain basically bigger than in real life.
So moving to published 1241. All right. So is this a photograph you've seen before?
Yes.
And what can you tell the jury about the application of luminol as you look at these photographs?
Well, on these photographs, of course, if you do it in a PowerPoint presentation, you don't see as much detail as you look at the real pictures on your screen.
So but what's happened here, and tell me if this is consistent with your photography experience, that on the left was the original photograph, and then on the right there was an addition of blue and light, so that the blue stands out more. Is that consistent with your understanding of these photos?
Yeah, I've seen the pictures.
Objection, lack of foundation. There's already been testimony that the entire picture was simply brightened by the agent.
That's I just don't want to create confusion around it, why there's two of the same thing. So let's move. Anyway.
All right, so you're okay with that explanation as to the difference, correct?
That's great.
All right, because that's what I remember.
So Eikelenboom, if you could point out what stood out to you about how luminol was applied, the dripping, does that say anything to you? And would that have any impact on the blood that is on the couch?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. This picture is, of course, not the best picture to see that on, but on the other picture you could see it, and there's lots of other pictures which were provided by me, which were taken by the police, the FBI. And what you could see is that, the whole couch and seat were luminol was applied to, and that you could see that there was, you could see all these droplets on top of this object, also on the table. And of course, there's a volume of luminol which started running, especially on the vertical surface.
But that's what you were able to see is droplets running down the surface, and that, in your estimation, would have some impact on the evidence?
Yes, of course. And as you could see, is that the luminol hit some blood on this seat. But yeah, of course, if you apply a lot of luminol or too much luminol in order that the volume gets so big that the gravity just pulls it down. Then you get drip patterns, as we call them.
Your Honor, permission to approach.
Yes.
Actually, Judge, can we approach the bench briefly?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So, Judge, understanding that these are demonstrative exhibits, just to explain concepts to the jury, I wouldn't object to them. I believe it's 1248 through 1252.
Is that right, Mr. Moran? 1248 through 52?
Yes, please.
All right. 1248 through 52 are admitted. 1245 is still not admitted, though, in case you're wondering.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Mr. Eikelenboom, I've provided some photographs. We're going to put them up here in a second. Do these photographs look familiar?
Yes.
And are these photographs that you provided to me and we provided to the prosecution?
Yes.
And these photographs are for demonstrative purposes. You have nothing to do with this case, is that right?
Yeah, they're not related to this case.
And are these previous crime scenes you've worked on, or at least crime scenes that you think demonstrate the points that you've been making here?
Yes. So some of them are from crime scenes I worked on, and some of them are from, I think these were colleagues from Canada.
May I direct your attention to the image behind you, and if stepping down helps you to make this point, feel free. Does this illustrate?
Which page is that?
1248.
Thank you.
Does this illustrate the point that you've described with respect to the sensitivity of luminol?
Yeah, in this sense, it's a good example. You can see before and after, and they probably overlaid this picture with the luminescence on top of the first picture. But you can see here that there's nothing visible here. It's clearly recognizable at the same location, and you have all kinds of marks in there which will make it identifiable where the stain is. And then you can see this blue luminescence, very strong. And then also you can see that it is much wider than this stepping plate, which are about 3.
Would you say that there is evidence of cleanup present here?
Yeah, so we have to be careful with interpretation. So the blood stain pattern, and as you have to be careful with what happened there, what was the stain, what mechanism was the stain caused, I don't know. There's nothing visible here, or very little. So here, what you could say, okay, well, at least maybe there's support for the hypothesis that something was clean because it was not visible here, and it's very visible here. So yeah, this would support an hypothesis of cleaning activity on this location.
Move to publish 1249. So in these images, originally, it's naked to the visible eye or very difficult to see, and then we describe what's going on?
Yeah, so the same here. But here, yeah, the officers, you can see they describe it as an even bigger scene. So, yeah, strong support for cleaning activity in this area. You see some staining, but it is not really clear to people that's the blood. They apply luminol and another presented test after that. And then you can see, yeah, you have a large area in front of this table. You see the stepping place, which is obviously or clean.
Does this demonstrate a big bloodletting or a cleanup, can you say?
So, yeah, there you have to be very careful. As said, the luminol is extremely sensitive. And, of course, in laboratory testing, the 1 in 100,000, well, that's not what we see in a crime scene, but what we see in a crime scene is an area which is clean. So what volume of blood could have caused this? Well, actually, I can use a pretty small amount of blood and then use some, for instance, a tube, pour it over there, and then start cleaning, and I wipe this blood all over the floor during the cleaning activity. And I make the stain much bigger and bigger. So I cannot estimate the volume. It could also be that there was a large pool which was clean. So liter of blood, 2 liters. In your system, 2 liters is half a gallon.
Don't look at me.
So half a gallon or something. So that would be a lot, but you don't know because that's the volume of the blood by cleaning it is taken away. So some people do say, oh, there must be a lot of blood there. You cannot say this from this. It could be quite a small stain, which was just blood around all the time, still staining there, and they make it bigger and bigger. And then they saw the red lining still, so they made it even bigger and more water on it, and then the stain gets bigger and bigger. So somebody should not testify to the amount of blood.
What would your expectation be given the sensitivity of luminol if you sprayed it in this room or a normal home?
When there was blood in the room, or?
Sure. Is it unsurprising that there are small trace amounts of blood that are with innocent explanation?
Yeah. So when we did a lot of crime scenes during the project, and even after that, because it was very useful. But what we also always found, nearly always, I remember only one case, it was a homicide though, where we didn't find all kinds of reactions and found blood. But of course, you have to keep in mind that in a house where persons are living, you always find blood with luminol. Maybe not with the naked eye, but if you start bleeding, I just maybe cleaning my teeth with your gums, or even dry climate here, then you get blood on the house and then you clean it away. You don't see that with the naked eye anymore. So okay, this is clean, but with the luminol, we always detect those things. So in kitchens, in bathrooms, in nearly every crime scene I went to, we found blood. And of course, later we did the presumptive test and then the DNA, and then we find out that this is not a pure victim, but just some persons who were living there. So in that sense, you always be careful. If you get a positive test, it doesn't always mean that somebody was killed there. It just means you find blood. And you have to put it in the bigger picture, whether or not it was related to a crime.
Yeah, it's published 1250, for the record, 1250.
Yes.
Similar here, something negative, or hidden to the naked eye, you can see it with the luminol.
Yeah, so yeah, this is nice. I didn't take this, but yeah, it's a nice demonstrative that you can sometimes even discard it. This is very well clean, so I don't know which kind this was, but you can see that it is very nicely done. That the part of the picture as it was before manipulation with luminol. Then after over projecting the picture with luminol, you can see there's blood staining. And as I said, carpets. I never seen somebody cleaning a carpet that well that we were not able to detect the blood anymore. Even if it's very well cleaned, so as you see here, still the luminol will detect it because you don't get it out of the fiber. So the underground is extremely important. If you want to say something about the possibilities of cleaning and how clean it looks and when whether or not you can detect blood still.
May I publish 1251 for the record? 1251 coming up. Yes. Yes. Hold on. We're going the other way. This one. Okay. Again, another one where, to the naked eye, this would have appeared like nothing had.
Yeah. So this was a crime scene. This is actually a crime scene we did in the Netherlands. Somebody was done to death here. Body was found somewhere outside, dumped. And you had to go in here and then look for, well, all the blood was just there. And with the naked eye was not so much. There's some small spatter. But when we started investigating with luminol, you could see that there was all kinds of cleanup activity which were not visible to the naked eye anymore. And this is also a picture where we over-projected the stains. So you can see that there was blood on all these locations. And based on the autopsy, not on the blood stains, this person was tortured in the stains. And
this was your crime scene, so you would not have sprayed luminol if this was visible to the naked eye?
Yeah. So, but there's two things. You have the DNA sampling part, where you take DNA samples, and then later on, for purposes of the court, if you want to show what happened, because there was much more. This victim was dragged through the whole house, or was moved through the whole house. We had luminol positive reactions, and this type of thing here to through all the house to the basement, into the basement, where we found more blood and spatter as well. So this was for reconstructional purposes.
Sir, did you say that this was a blunt force trauma?
Yes.
Homicide? Yeah. 1252, please. Mr. Eikelenboom, this is another one of your crime scenes, is that
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And just another example of a good cleanup that was obvious to you when luminol was applied?
Yes. So what we see here is this was months after we went to the body was found decapitated somewhere in a ditch in the northern part of Holland. And then later on, through informants, they found out that the homicide likely would have taken place in this location as science center in the north. And well, you can see there's not much visible here. We did see some staining, very small staining. We, of course, took samples from those. But then we started applying luminol also for seeing what could have happened there. So at the time of the crime, there would be a bed here somewhere. And as you can see here, before and after, there's a lot of luminescence. What's important to mention as well is that you see blue fluorescence here, very straight. And actually, that's false positive reaction of the paint on the doors. That's what we see very often. This paint is probably used permanently, and that's a chemical which is gives fluorescence as well. But of course, if you take the picture, you cannot filter that out. It's either fluorescence or not, and if fluorescence, you can pick it up. So we tested the door frame, and that was negative. So these things were all positive for blood. This is presented this test afterwards. So that was a false positive reaction.
Thank you. And meaning to move off this in just a moment, but I've got one more, 1253. I want to make sure that that's okay with Mr. Johnson. That's the more recent one I gave you. It says luminol on it, several photographs.
Judge, I think it's cumulative and unnecessary, so I do object to this one.
Your Honor, if I made it, I don't mean to get...
I'm going to let you put it in if you want.
Thanks.
1253 is submitted.
So I know not all of these are your photographs, but does the one in the top left demonstrate something that stands out to you?
Yeah. I don't know who made it, but of course, yeah, you can see the size whereby the person is sitting is in there. And yeah, like a track mark, but yeah, a lot of cleaning activity. Large volume, not large volume, large area.
The one on the top right and the one below it, I think those are your photographs, or at least the bottom right one. But when people wash blood off,
yes,
are you able to detect that with luminol?
Yes, often. As I said, they did quite a lousy job here, because you can see that this was still luminescing here, and it is quite smooth. The bath and sinks are made to clean well, so you know that there's a lot of staining there. And it's clean for the naked eye, but you still see it here. I did a lot of homicides where thorough cleaning took place, and then with normal, the tile floor, the tiles you can clean, but not the things in between. But in this case, the tiles also lit up.
And then the last point on this issue, bottom left, that's your photograph, so I understood.
No, this one not. I don't think so.
Okay. At any rate, same principles, but you're not able to say how much blood is there.
No.
It's just iron that oxidizes, the luminol is being moved around.
Yes, and on a quite large area, of course. So.
Thank you. That's all I'll have on demonstrative photos. So 12:43, I'm still on safe ground with that one. It's 12:45, I've got issues with it.
Not issues, I'm just requesting a foundation.
So permission to publish defense, 12:43.
You can publish all of these, you don't have to ask if they're admitted.
12:43 is admitted, publishing now. When you, the other photographs you had were of better quality, is that accurate?
So what do you mean by that, better quality in sense?
Just that you were able to see that there was liquid on the top of the coffee table.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, it's more difficult to see on PowerPoint pictures, of course. I don't know. But yeah, you could see that there was liquid on the table, which, as I said, is normal because luminol is a fluid, and you will spray fluid on top of an object, or in this case, top. And so yeah, you will see that if you take a picture.
In your expertise, would you suspect if there had been cleanup that there would be fluorescing material in the cracks and other imperfections on the wood there?
Yeah, so as I said, the surface is very important. And as I said, if it's smooth, thin, then you can clean it away very, very easily and good if it's thorough. But yeah, with the table, yeah, there's a lot of cracks and yet, so it's not smooth. And that makes it more difficult to clean. So here you have a stain, there's no ruler there, but that's not that big. Information about the size of the cracks on the table itself.
Mr. Eikelenboom, is it helpful if I increase the size of the image on the right? I want to demonstrate the droplets that you pointed out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look here, yeah, I think this is helpful. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, it looks like that there's fluid on this, and therefore you can see here there's fluid anyway. So this is a picture where luminol was applied.
The jurors will have better pixels of this photograph, but do you recall that there was also droplets running off the side of the coffee table? Such that they would have been falling to the carpet or the rug? They would have been falling to the rug.
So from here on out, Judge, I'm going to object to leading on those types of questions. The expert can just be asked what he saw.
I think that's appropriate. So you can answer that question and then please stop at the leading questions.
Understood. I can find a better photograph of it. Permission to approach with what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 1033.
Yes.
Mr. Eikelenboom, are you familiar with this photograph?
Yes, I've seen this.
Is this help? Is this a little better than what you were just looking at?
Yeah.
Does it demonstrate anything on the side of the coffee table that is of note to you?
Yeah, this picture makes
Hold
it.
on. Are you admitting 1033?
Permission to admit and publish.
Yeah, I have no objection, Judge. This is one of those that's already, I think, People's 161.
All right.
I'm not sure if it's as good a quality from looking at it, but I have no objection.
All right, 1033 is admitted. All right, go ahead.
And sir, is there something on the side of the coffee table that stands out to you?
Yes, if you apply the luminol, of course, in the dark, it's always more difficult to work than if you have light, so you have to move around. So you just apply it, and of course, you don't apply it on top of the surface, but also on the sides. So what you see on this picture is that, yeah, you have droplets, and of course, on the vertical surfaces, if you use large volumes or with the hand sprayer, it's more easy to get drop formation, and the drops will start running. And that's what you seem to see here on this picture, that there's a droplet hanging on the side of the table.
Would that transfer evidence in your estimation? Can luminol transfer evidence?
Yeah, of course. If it runs, you see that on the picture of the chair very easily. You see the blood, or yeah, it was tested positive for blood. So let's assume that it was the whole stain. What you see luminescent was blood. Then from that you see running. Well, of course, actually blood is very soluble in water. Water solutions. You're going to clean blood out of your clothing. You use cold water, and then you can see the stain will get bigger. But also, yeah, on crime scene, if you use this luminol, which is a watery solution, yeah, it will start running, and of course, it will the blood will run down with it for a bit.
In your professional expertise, does this look to be diluted to you? I mean, is this a one-to-one blood droplet, or is this something else?
So, yeah, of course, the interpretation, we have to be very careful. I don't know if this was a droplet or a transfer. You can see on the picture itself that the outer sides are diluted. And that's why I say, okay, we use the professional spray painter so that you get a very fine film. Yeah, you have to be careful with what you see here, but yeah, it looks like that the blood is running out, on where it starts getting fainter. So yeah, the blood will dissolve by the watery solution and then start running actually through the cracks a little bit. You see this. They're not nerves, but there's relief in there, like on this table. And yeah, you can see that it starts running about there. And that's pretty normal. But it even could happen with if you use spray paint.
So if that blue there is approximately the size of a dime, would you say there's a dime-sized drop of blood on that table?
I wouldn't call it drop. If you don't know, we have this terminology thing, and if you don't know the mechanism which makes it, just call it stain. A drop will indicate a blood drop that you injure yourself and a drop of blood came out of the finger or nose and drop from there. That would be bigger than this probably and in different shape. So it's just a blood stain. We don't know the mechanism, blood stain. So there was blood here because it tested positive, I think. And not tested positive is positive percentage testing, and not failing at least. So there was blood on the table. For the size, I would say smaller than at least the luminescence you see, because we know it's running. And then, yeah, it would have been helpful to have a ruler there, but yeah, it's pretty small.
It's different. It has different characteristics than a drop of blood was. I mean, if that was red and that was a drop of blood, I'm sorry to use drop again, but that just has different characteristics than a drop would. Is that fair?
Yeah. A droplet of blood, I would have photographed it before I started applying luminol, because then we changed the appearance. I didn't see, I looked at the pictures, all of them, I could find on this and see if there a way that I could find the stain before the luminol was applied. I couldn't. So I'm not sure the picture I had was before or after, but I never saw the staining. So it was quite difficult to see, or I didn't see anything before or after the application of luminol on this location in the table. So it was kind of an invisible stain.
Mr. Eikelenboom, in looking at this image, is it your professional opinion that a crime occurred because of this blue dot?
Objection is argumentative.
I don't think he can answer that question. I mean, based upon one small piece of something. Okay, you might be able to get there.
Okay, I'll unpack it. Can you say conclusively, based on your crime scene investigation expertise, that what we see in blue here, this luminol, indicates that there was a blunt force trauma in this room?
Hold on. You're talking about the whole room?
I'm talking about this specific thing.
Well, that's what I just said I didn't think you could do. I think you have to do it on a bigger basis.
The next question was about the couch, but that's fine. I'm happy to ask it that way.
And then if you want to drill down, I guess you could do it that way.
Okay, thank you. Sir, based on the imagery you're observing, specifically with respect to the luminol fluorescing in this room, or luminescing, are you able to say that there was a crime that occurred in this room?
So yeah, we're talking about all the stains and luminol positive reactions.
Yes, sir.
So what's important, of course, is that with the luminol we have the false positive reaction, so it has to be positive for the presenter test as well, and also tested by the lab later on, because there are some stains which there's questions about whether or not later on it was blood. So, but if you just talk about the blood stains which were observed, and then of course what's also important, without talking too much about the DNA, but what's important of course is the source of blood. Who was the source of blood? And if you have a mixture of DNA, then you don't know the source of blood, because then there's like 2 or 3 persons in there. One of those persons, or all 3 of them, that we don't know, could have donated blood onto the sample. So it's important for blood pattern analysis to know the source of blood, and there's actually only one on the chair, where there's a single source. There's tested positive blood, presumptive tested positive blood, and that was confirmed for DNA Dylan. So strong hypothesis, strong support for the hypothesis that Dylan donated blood on the chair. The other ones, there's mixtures.
I should have unpacked this more before you. Okay. Based on the luminol alone, would you say that there is proof of blood force trauma, bloodletting in this room?
No, but as said, luminol is not a very good item to do blood pattern analysis with, because it distorts your blood stains or your blood splatter, which you need for blood force. Then you would expect blood splatter. Hit somebody on the head several times, then you get blood splatter on the walls and the carpet, and the floors and tables. So you would see the small splatter, and then we would do all kinds of calculations and screening, find out of this area of origin, and to find out whether or not really a blood was infected place in blood of Dylan. Well, that was not found in this film.
So outside of the couch, so there's the spot on the couch was Dylan.
Towards you a little bit.
Sorry. The blood on the love seat was Dylan alone. Yeah. Does that amount of blood, as luminesced by luminol, suggest to you that there was bloodletting that caused the death at that spot? No. You have to, as I said, what happens is that you have all kinds of daily occurrences, and I don't know if Dylan was a rough guy, but I remember for myself that I still that regular bloodletting incidences where I set my fingers,
we get bleeding gums, nosebleeds quite easily in dry climate. So you don't need a lot of blood to create luminescence we see on that chair.
I think it's okay to have a seat now. It sounds like the application of luminol here was not how you would do it, or you've come up with a better way to apply it so it's more even, it doesn't pool like that?
Yes, we started out with the spray bottles, and we found, you could see that on the first picture where we used the spray bottles, that, yeah, it's especially vertical objects, the dripping starts actually after the first sprays already. But in order to see it well, and the metal group in the blood is kind of concealed. That's why you have the luminescence a little bit longer than with false positives. So often, and I think that's what happened here as well, you spray at one location, you don't give it one spray, but you give a little bit extra to get more luminescence. But of course, the disadvantage of that is that it starts dripping. So then we start thinking, okay, how can we apply this kind of force to the surface you're treating with luminol without getting the dripping effect? And then, yeah, we came out with this very fine mist used by painting spray pistols. That's what we start using in the Netherlands.
Is some reason you would do that so that you're not diluting it and making it run?
Yeah, especially for the pictures, of course. You distort the pictures with the running and all the luminol. And of course, also with DNA, if it's a very small stain, diluting it won't help with DNA testing, of course. And there's all kinds of chemicals in there, especially hydrogen peroxide and sodium hydroxide, which are kind of aggressive. There's some discussion about how bad it is for your DNA, but anybody can feel that it is not good to apply these chemicals onto your DNA sample.
So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk to you about luminol photography. Are there sort of three ways or three things you do to properly photograph something, specifically with respect to range?
Yeah, of course, as I said, luminol photography is difficult because you have to do it in the dark, and then you always come up with some kind of manipulation. And we used all kinds of methods to achieve this, and not all of them are such nice pictures as we took there. It's very time consuming. Every object actually you have to take still, and then you have to change to the other object. So it's time consuming if you do it very thoroughly. But what we, and I think they did as well, you take a picture before you start the investigation so that you have a good location. What we do is we put it on a tripod camera, take a picture before that, keep the camera still in all locations, put a ruler in there, and then you start applying the luminol. And then you use how you call that, a mirror reflex camera, Nikon. And then you take the picture before, and then you leave the camera in the exact same position, and then you take the picture again in the dark, but you leave the camera open as long, or the lens open as long as needed to detect the luminescence, because as you can see, it's very difficult to detect it. And if you use a normal camera or your phone, it will just only detect if it goes click, click, then you don't even detect the luminescence. So you have to leave your camera lens open, and that makes it more difficult. So you take the picture before, during, and then after you find it, and you can see that here as well, we use small needles to because that's working in the dark. Keep in mind, it's completely dark, so you put some markers there. Here they use like, I think it was sticks from swabs. But you have to mark the locations where you find the luminescence, because you need to take a sample later on. So we use the small needles, and then we mark those locations, and then later on you take a sample from those. I think that's, they use the small wooden sticks you see in the pictures here. And then you take the sample. But what we would do is we would take the sample straight away from the object and test that for blood. I think the procedure over here is that they take the swab and they test the swab for blood, which is fine as well.
Eikelenboom, also, when taking these photographs, you do an overall mid-range and close-up.
Yeah.
Was that done with the photographs that you were provided here?
No, not always, no.
were there rulers in the photographs, and is it proper to use rulers?
Yeah, of course, and especially with the luminol, it's good to know how big the stains are, because well, you don't want to do over-interpretation or to do too much interpretation, but yeah, the sizes of stains, of course, are important to know. So yes, at one point you would like to have at least a ruler in there. And of course, with luminol application, this could be difficult, because if you put your ruler exact on top of a blood stain, you have to redo it again.
Publishing 1168, about, I beg your pardon, 1244? 1244. Mr. Eikelenboom, is this spatter, can you say with any confidence that that's what we're seeing here in the image taken in front of the love seat? This did not test positive for blood, so is there anything you can ask the jury about what's going on here?
Yeah, so
Correction, Judge, that actually, counsel may just be mistaken, but this is in the northeast corner, I believe, and that did test positive for blood. So I don't know if counsel is mistaken about that, or if I'm looking at the picture wrong. Is that People's 167 in your?
My recollection is that that's in front of the love seat, so east side, kind of towards the door.
We have plenty of exhibits counsel can refer to that have been admitted and testified, I think 340, and those indicate this is the northeast corner, and it did test positive for the phenol and the hematrace.
So assuming that it tested positive for blood, is there anything you can say about whether this is blood spatter, or what would you?
Well, as I said before, with the luminol, you have to be very careful. The luminol is applied as very small droplets, and actually that's spatter. So you see very small droplets, but the interpretation of the blood, which is made luminous, or blood, if there was blood there, made it luminous, then you have to be careful with the interpretation of the pattern. So I would call it blood pattern. Okay. The picture is not clear enough to do determination of this blood spatter or something else.
Does this indicate evidence of cleanup?
Yeah, so as you saw the other examples of cleanup in real crime scenes, not in this case, you could see that these are quite large areas. If there was a serious blood incident there, and as I said, in my scene, somebody was tortured there, bled more or less to death, and the other one was decapitation. So yeah, there's no scale here, but you can see something of a tripod. But, yeah, these are not extreme, the big stains, luminol. So.
And would you expect to see sort of more wiping or flattening of the blue with a white?
Yeah, with typical cleaning.
Objection. Judge, she's already testified that you shouldn't be doing that with these photographs. He's already testified you can't draw conclusions from photographs like this. Now he's being asked by counsel more specific questions to make those very conclusions.
Hold on.
It's more clear with Defense Exhibit 1041B.
So you're just moving on then?
Yes, I'll
Okay, all right.
make this point better with the other exhibit.
So 1041B,
Please, and before I publish that, may I approach one?
please don't do B's and C's. I told you guys not to do that beforehand, okay? That just is a real problem with record keeping. So I know this case is almost over, but in the future, don't do that. Thank you. That's it.
It sounds like there's no objection. I'd move to publish 1041.
No objection?
That's correct, Judge.
It's admitted, and it can be published.
Does this one help in any indication here that there's wiping?
I said before, you have to be careful with conclusions, but yeah, the cleaning activities is the one thing with luminol you can say something about, but you don't see clearly that some wet bloody object was wiped.
I think it will be towards the bottom of the pile of photographs I gave you, sir, and it says Defense Exhibit 1245 on it. If I can have you move to that one. This one has not been admitted. This one, the prosecution's requesting some foundation. If you need another copy, I have one here. Permission to approach.
Sure. 45. Oh no, I don't have that one yet.
Mr. Eikelenboom, have you seen these two photographs before?
Yes, I think these are photographs we took during the evidence viewing.
So at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, you brought a camera and took some pictures of evidence that they were holding there?
Yes.
And are these fair and accurate representations of pieces of evidence that you observed at the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
Permission to approach.
With that, Judge, I have no objection.
So are they photographs of what you're approaching with? And which is? All right. 1245 is admitted.
Your Honor, permission to publish the image of this exhibit that's been entered.
Yes.
And I don't know if I moved to enter it, but I would move to do that as well.
I just admitted it.
Great, thank you. So, sir, on the left, what do you see? I'm referring to the image behind you now.
Oh, sorry.
And is it the same thing that's sitting in front of you here?
Yes.
And when you were at the Sheriff's Office taking a look at this, did something on this piece of evidence stand out to you?
Yes. Yeah, when we review the evidence, you look for all kinds of materials. As I said, I'm not an expert in everything, but of course, you look for all kinds of evidence. It's fine. Working with multidisciplinary teams, you learn a little bit about other things. So, and then you look at things that stand out, and then, of course, you look at the damage. You look at, in this case, something, I don't know what the meaning of it is, but yeah, there's the sticker of banana thing, I think, Chiquita, and it's stuck onto the, because we tested that, okay, I thought first, I've seen this picture taken by crime scene officers, or not this picture, but of course pictures by crime scene officers, and the sticker is already there. But I thought it was more or less loose on the evidence, so it's just by coincidence it was there. But when we looked at it and tested it, you could see that it was still stuck onto the clothing.
Mr. Eikelenboom, will you take a look at the piece of evidence that's on the witness stand? Do you still see that sticker?
Yes. It's still there.
Could it be possible to get touch DNA off of a Chiquita banana sticker?
Yes.
How about fingerprints?
Fingerprints can be taken from all kinds of smooth objects, and stickers are that. So I won't guarantee a result, but it would have been a possibility to test one.
And the sticky side of a sticker, is that a place where fingerprints would be left?
Yeah, of course, if you grab it, especially with touch DNA, sticky we get very good results with spot DNA on sticky tape, and for fingerprints it has to be kind of smooth. So the smoother the object, the better, the bigger the chance that you get a good object. And then size, well, sticky to the size of the finger, so there would have been a chance to obtain results of that.
In your expert opinion, is there reason to think that the placement of this is accidental or something else?
Objection.
Yeah.
Hold on.
He already testified that he can't even draw a conclusion from this.
I don't know how you can make a conclusion on the placement.
The way it's wrapped around that piece of cloth.
One,
I think he put it in his report.
This was in his report?
It's in his interview too. He said he can't draw any conclusions, and he just testified consistently and fairly with that.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Mr. you can have a seat if that's more comfortable. Pardon me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but what is adipocere?
Adipocere is a kind of waxy solution, waxy material, and we see that very often when bodies are decomposing, and especially with clothing. If the clothing is still on the body, then during decomposition you get this waxy kind of material on there.
And hold on just a second. Can you just, for the record, spell it as best you can?
Adipocere.
Thank you.
Did you observe something that you thought may be adipocere on this shirt?
Yes, of course we didn't test it, and so this is observations made during the view of evidence, and then based on your experience, what you've seen in other cases, but that of course doesn't make it so. And knowing the circumstances in this case that his body was there at least for 2 years, for around 2 years, for a long time at least outside. And then you get this typical staining, which you can see in several of these items, that looks like the adipocere, and that could be, pieces of tissue from Dylan.
Permission to approach.
Yes.
Showing counsel what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 1198 and 1216.
Since they're up, I'm going to make no objection.
All right.
I'm being told that I may have messed up my numbers. And Judge, we are not doing this to confound the court. When we're trying to respond to evidence, we're building on the numbers we started with, and that's why they're not sequential.
No objection to 1216. No objection to 1148.
1216 and 1148 or 98?
98.
They're both admitted.
So these are just closer images of what we've been describing.
Yes. Close-ups.
Permission to publish 1216.
Why not?
Again, this is just a better quality image of what we've been talking about.
We took several samples, of course, of several pictures, and then the overall mid-range and close-ups. And some of them, if there's an indication, we would also use a digital microscope to go even deeper on some kind of details. I don't think we did use it on this one, but we took a close-up.
Because you were at the sheriff's office and didn't have your laboratory equipment?
Yeah, it would, of course, in our own lab, we have more possibilities. It would have been preferable to have the evidence and also do your own presumptive testing, but that was not allowed. So, this was just an evidence view, and then, we have to make some assumptions of what you see.
What you believe may have been adipocere your technique here would have been to put that under a microscope or do further testing?
Yeah, with the adapter, yeah, you could do further testing if you wanted to know. Of course, you have to look at the context. In this case, you could do literally millions of testing, DNA testing, and you have to see whether it's important or not. With adapter, we also specifically looked for it, and also with the sticker, it's okay. You wanted to know in this situation whether or not Dylan was still wearing his clothing, or maybe that the clothing was taken off. If there's adipocere on the clothing and all kinds of other staining, then there could be an indication that his clothing was off at the time when it was found, or at the time then when he died. The adipocere would be an indication that this type, or this piece of evidence was still in contact with his skin at the time when he died and after that.
Will you tell the jury what ALS is?
Alternate light source. This is what you probably all have seen in crime scene investigation CSI series. It's basically a blue light, and then you use orange goggles. We use different filters. You can use all kinds of filters: yellow, green, blue. But yeah, normally it's blue light. You can adjust the light source as well, and then you can take pictures and see if something fluoresces in the dark. So that's also taken in the dark. And well, with adipocere and blood, that can be helpful. Like with blood, absorbs most of the light, so you don't see it, but you can see it sometimes as a black stain. So that could be an indication of blood. And then with adipocere and bodily fluids, those fluoresce very often with alternate light sources. So then you have an indication, and that's just a presumptive test as well, then with light, that could be bodily fluids. But of course, after you find a suspicious stain, as we call it, then further testing would be recommended.
When were you able to use an alternative light source in this?
Yes, we used alternate light sources. We used strong blue light and infrared. And infrared, especially used on dark objects. And then what sometimes happens is that the dark object, when we had it with the shoelace in this case, becomes white, and then but the blood still absorbs light and it becomes black. So then if you see if you have a white surface, it didn't happen with the shirt, unfortunately, but then background becomes white, and then the black stains are of interest, because then you think, okay, that could be blood. And of course, you have to do presumptive testing to find out, but we were not allowed to do that.
And did you observe fluorescence with the alternative light source on evidence in this case?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly where, but yeah, we did see it on some of the pieces.
So, Your Honor, at this point I object. The disclosure in the report and the interview, there's absolutely no reference to any recommendation for further testing. So that opinion was never conveyed to the prosecution or rendered prior to this testimony, and it shouldn't be allowed.
That is not accurate. There were recommendations in the report that we provided from independent forensic services.
I don't know, so I can't make a decision based upon that. I'm going to allow this to go forward, but please make sure you confine yourself to the report. And while we're stopped, do you have much more for this Eikelenboom?
We're in the home stretch, Your Honor.
Well, what does that mean in terms of time?
That we should probably take a break.
Doesn't sound good.
I think 15, 20 minutes, but I would hate to keep
Then it's
anyone.
time to take a break. It's just this type of testimony is hard on the report. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, please remember your admonitions, not to talk to each other. Don't make any decisions about the case till this is over with, and we'll start up again at 10:20. Is everybody ready for the break? Right, we're in recess.
You can sit down, but we're not gonna talk to you. You do whatever, you got them all.
How you doing, sir? Good.
People who items, evidence, and money.